Greetings all! We are going to be doing something a little bit different this time. Instead of spending most of this video looking at my beautiful visage, you are instead going to be watching a computer monitor, although you will still continue to hear the dulcet tones of my voice. The reason for this is that in order to properly explain the Abrams fire control system and Switchology, it's a lot easier to show you than it is to simply talk about it. And well, I don't happen to have an operating M1, so the best thing I can do is show you a simulator. And the simulator in question is called Stabilization Pro. It is not a computer game. It is quite literally a military-grade simulator that you just happen to be able to buy and place on your PC if you have enough disposable income and time and willingness. I mean, I would use this if the official conduct to fire trainer wasn't available on the base and we're doing a gunnery. I'll be in the barracks with my gunner and would be running this to do some of the dry runs before we actually went onto the tank on the range. And your typical game is like an hour and a half long and you're shooting for maybe 5 minutes of it, and when you do die it's without warning, and then 6 seconds later you hear the gunshot of the tank that killed you that was 2 kilometers away, you know, flash to bang. So I can think of more than a few World of Tanks players that really wouldn't get on well with this, but as a simulator it works very well. And so I am going to use this to explain the FCS of the M1. So this kind of fits in between the Tanks 102 video I did a little while ago and the yet to be filmed, next time I get up to Boston, M1A1 inside the hatch. Or maybe not next time I get up to Boston, but whenever I have time to do it. So without further ado, let's load up the software and let's start talking fire control sets. You might find it's a little bit more complicated to learn than perhaps you might think. Alright, so here we are in front of our M1A1. Hooray! So starting off in the commander's position, first thing I'll do is just observe that this is not where you would ordinarily stand, because you're sticking your head way the hell out. In actuality, you'd go down to what is more like an eyeball defilade. Now, I was fortunate enough that because I was tall, I could sit on the seat back here, and my head was quite literally just with the eyes right above the periscope rim. A lot of the other folks, what you have to do is you have to lift up this seat bottom and stand on an adjustable platform underneath, so they're standing. Haha, sucks to be them. This gives you a couple of advantages. Firstly, you still get the full 360-degree vision. It's effectively the same as it would be in the open protected position like this. So you get most of the same visibility, obviously with a little bit more up top. The other advantage is you get this windshield right in front of you. It's actually sort of a two-way vision block. You can look through it horizontally, as I am right now, or you can look at the bottom through the periscope, and there's a mirror up here so it reflects out a little bit further. And you can see the backup sight for the caliber 50. The main sight is here on the right. Speaking of the caliber 50, you can see how it's a simple solenoid that applies to the butterfly trigger. When you get actually down inside and you start looking at all the periscopes, well, I mean, and if you think about it, this is actually pretty reasonable. Later, the A2s have a bigger periscope yet even than this, but as you can see, it's pretty limited. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a quick advantage of the fact that I have a quote-unquote working tank and try to explain something that's been causing a lot of controversy in both my Panzer III and Panther videos, when I explain that I don't see any need for the azimuth ring that is on the outside of the Panther's cupola, because it is my contention that you don't need it to know which way your gun is facing compared to the hull. Two reasons for this. Firstly, if you look down, you can actually physically see the hull, and when you start learning the bits and pieces of the inside of the hull, you can actually start figuring out where you are compared to anywhere else. So for example, this is the hull ammunition stowage. It's on the right rear of the hull. So very obviously my turret must be facing over the left side. People forget that there's hull ammo stowage in the M1. There actually is. It's 6 rounds. The majority of it, of course, is up here that you access by use of the knee switch. That's the turret lock, by the way, and caliber 50 stowage in the armrest. Go a bit further around, and if I recall, that is the fuel cutoff. If you accidentally hit power off instead of shut down, your engine will run away with you, and the only way to shut it down is to hit the fuel cutoff. It has this nasty habit sometimes of working loose and getting caught in the turret basket. Really embarrassing. Go a little bit further around again, and you will see the driver's hole is going to show up here. Oops. Yeah, I went too far, I think. Yeah, I did. Computer games aren't necessarily the best. So yeah, here's the driver's hole, and this is actually a swing gate. So you take all this aft cap capture out of the way, and this becomes a swing gate. So when you see an M1 parked in storage, you'll see that it's a little bit over to the left as the turret is looking at it of the rear deck, and that's to align this gate with the driver's hole so we can get out. So anyway, after a while you get to know the inside of your tank very well, and you just glance down very quickly. You don't need to look at anything else, and immediately you know which way you're facing. The other thing you can do is quite simply just drive. So as you're driving, you can tell that this way is forward because that's the way you're going. The ground is coming directly at you if you're looking that way. If you're looking at the right, the ground is going directly off to one side. If you're looking off to, say, the 1 o'clock, you can see that the ground is kind of coming a bit of a mixture. And this happens as you're looking through the periscopes as well. So as you're looking, as you start rotating around, so right now I'm looking directly over the left side of the hull, and now I'm looking. You can see the ground is kind of coming a little bit closer towards me, so it's more like the 10 o'clock. If I look on the right hand side, there we go. So from the front, there's the direct front, there's the side. You can just see how the ground sort of changes its movement in relation to where you are. So again, I'm now looking over the left hand side of the hull, because if you drive forward, you can see the ground is moving right to left. So for a general gunner scan to 2 o'clock, you don't need an azimuth indicator. Anyway, that done. A couple of other knobs and switches. Builder's plate, 23.1 ton. For caliber 50 arming, and there's only one electrical trigger. This is it. That fires the caliber 50 solenoid with a manual elevation. So this is a purely geared or banded system. There's a band here that elevates and depresses. It is not a flex mount like it is in the caliber in the A2. The sight is a very simple graduated sight with range at the bottom. And the nice thing about it is that you get precision fires on a target without exposing your turret at all. So if you're in a defensive position and your first target that pops up is a PC, let's say this is a gunnery back in the old days of table 8, I guess now table 6, you just put your sight on the target and immediately caliber 50. And you don't need to expose the turret at all. You get a 0 exposure time, so they should be easy points. It's a very accurate machine gun that way. You can flip it between. Oh, traversing. Let me traverse the caliber 50 around a little bit here again. Put it back up straight. The power traverse is this handle here. You select between. This is an incredibly flimsy handle between the manual and regular power. Your left hand for stability comes up here. This is a guard that protects your elbow from coming in the way of the breech. So while your hand is up here, you can easily toggle the radio or the intercom system as you desire. Commander sight extension so you can see what the gunner is looking at. What is not shown here is the Blue Force tracker panel that I would have had, for example, in my tank in Iraq. Older system now, of course, because that was nearly 15 years ago. It was 15 years ago, God help me. But the panel remains the same. So vehicle master power, that basically tells the electricity to start going around through the hull, and the intercom system, turret power, would start your motors. Battle sight range, I'll come back to that in a minute. But that's if you don't know what range the target is and you just want a default. Hunters will know it as maximum point blank range. and then you can, once you set that, you can add or drop accordingly. Aux hydraulic power, yeah, turn it on unless your battery's low. You get 2 salvos for your grenades, and that's it. Engine fire goes on, you got a problem. NBC alarm, if that goes on, you really have a problem. I was always amused by the air temp, especially the one that says cooler. Doesn't bloody work. And NBC, don't turn it on in peacetime or your tank will catch fire. It's a bit of a design flaw, really. Gunners correction, TC's override handle, so you can do all the gunning from here. And what I could do, because I was tall, is I would be sitting in this seat looking through the primary sight extension, but still being able to manipulate all the buttons, knobs and switches at the gunner seat because I could reach. So that is basically the bottom line for the TC side. Let's hop into the gunner seat and you can look at some of the knobs and switches here. First thing, going up at the top, you got these doors. These are, if you look on the outside of the tank, that's these doors here, the ballistic doors. So when you are under artillery barrage, let's say, you simply close those doors, one for thermal, one for the daylight, and you can't see a damn thing all of a sudden. All you see is black. So let's open them up again. Hydraulic pressure gauge, don't need to worry about that right now. Something that people always forget about, there is a Unity sight on the Abrams. This is the unmagnified sight. This has been on American tanks basically since day one. And what this does is basically gives the gunner a very good observation of what the hell's around them without the problem of the magnification of the primary sight, and without the problem of the obscuration of the auxiliary site. Coming a bit further down, in the Tanks 102, I was talking about how you do an MRS update to do the with the sensor on the end of the muzzle. So again, if I look through here, you can see there's the MRS sensor, the muzzle reference sensor, that is aiming at the sight, and it tells the gun, it tells the computer where the gun actually is compared to the sight. You make that adjustment by use of the control panel. This little toggle switch here will move your MRS around a little bit. Should be an MRS side, a light that pops up, I thought. But okay, no matter. So it's a very simple toggle, in or out. It's not simulated in this game, for better or worse. Coming further down, auxiliary site, primary site. Fire control modes, I'll talk about those in a few minutes. You got emergency, normal, and manual. Coming further down, I'm also going to talk about the controls for the laser rangefinder. So safe, first return, or last return. By default, you leave it on last return. Moving further down, drift. So if you start up your tank, let's say, and you turn on the motors, then what you might find happens when you activate the stabilization is you're going to see a very, very shallow drift, a bit like this. And by use of those two knobs, you basically null out the drift so that when the controls are centered, the turret doesn't traverse or elevate. Consider it like centering your joystick, if you want to do it that way. There is also for emergency mode, an emergency mode drift, but you got to unscrew this and play around with a screwdriver inside. It's technically a 20 level task, but you know, anybody can do it. Big red handle here is your master blaster, the emergency firing switch or emergency firing handle. It's a little dynamo. When you crank it hard to the right, boom goes the gun. Gun's primary control handles are down here. They call them the Cadillacs. So you got your laser rangefinders are the thumb switches, your triggers with the palms with your index fingers, and on the far side you can't really see it is the palm switch. It sort of is here, and what you do is you simply grasp the control that activates everything. A little bit of an annoyance when we had an exchange student over from the Romanian army, because apparently the Soviets do it in reverse. Not only does this handle work like a steering wheel, right to left, while the Soviet ones you push forwards and backwards, but that is actually apparently the trigger. So you're getting laze booms. A laze boom is when you try to laze, but the gun goes boom. Anyway, down underneath that, you got your selector for which filter is being seen through the sight here, either the daylight, or the infrared, the thermal imager. Ammunition selector. Unlike some tanks, such as Leopard 2, the gunner is responsible for telling the fire control system what round is in the tube. So he's got to listen out for both the fire command and what the loader reports. So if the commander just says fire, well, you have the next round being loaded is the same as the one that was in the tube. If he yells, say, fire, fire, heat, that means that the next round is going to be heat round, and the loader is going to confirm this after he loads the round. Instead of just saying up, that the next round is ready, he will say heat up. And you'll see the sabot and heat, being the two most likely rounds, are actually on opposite ends because there's no fine motor skills. You just crank all the way over one side to the other. Down underneath, that's your toggle switch for the magnification for the daylight sight. Selector for coax or the main gun, or trigger safe, which of course you don't want trigger safe in a computer game, but it's the point in that. And then on the right hand side you have the thermal imager. Again, separate magnifier for the thermal imager, so you can have by 10 on the thermal and by 3 on the daylight. It is a camera, so you do have to focus it. You got contrast and sensitivity as well. And what you'll see a lot of people will do in the thermal imager is that they will basically try to tune the thermal imager so it turns into a sort of black and white TV. There should be another M1 around here somewhere. There it is. And arguably, that's not what you want to do. What you want to do is you want to put the contrast such that if it's hot, it shows up, and if it's not hot, it doesn't show up. As near as you can practically do it. And the reason that you do that is that, especially at long distance, if you're scanning at high speed, burning out those turret motors, you may not actually see something at a long distance. But if you have it so that something that's hot is really just white and everything else is black, you ain't gonna miss it. So what you can do, especially in daylight, you'll configure it that way just to see the hot spot, and then when you find the hot spot, flip to the daylight sight and it'll show you what it is that you're looking at. At night, yeah, you make a slight adjustment to that, and because it's kind of pointless if you don't know what it is that you're aiming at. Another little item you have here is the polarity, black hot or white hot, and you can see what the difference is there. As a general rule, people leave it for white hot, but the nice thing about black hot is sometimes it's actually easier to figure out what the devil it is that you're looking at. The A1 actually has a fairly old thermal imaging system. The guys that came in from the N60A3 TTS thought it was a bit of a downgrade. And the resolution isn't the greatest, and probably accounts for some of the blue on blue that Abrams have been guilty of. That's about it. You do bore sights separately. The infrared to the daylight sight, so you'll actually bore sight the daylight with the computer. Speaking of the computer, things that you plug into the computer when you're bore sighting, the ammunition temperature behind here is a thermometer that reads what the ammo temperature is behind the muzzle. Barometric pressure gets put in, air temperature gets put in. That's where the infrared light is. Basically, this calibrates the atmospheric sensors to make sure that the gun goes where it's supposed to go. These are more often used in testing than in anything else. It is possible to manually input the range that you want to fire at, and you quite simply just range it, whatever your range is, hit enter and it'll put it into the ballistic computer. That is pretty much it for the gunner's seat right now. You got your M240 there with a little cable. Maybe I can see it better from the TC side. It's a very simple looping cable that you pull to recharge. And so now I've gone over the switches. Let me show you how the systems work. Okay, so we have ourselves a little simple tank range, and we're going to start off in normal mode. There's not very much to normal mode. All you do is you simply track the target for 1.5 seconds or so. That will allow the computer time to calculate the lead. Lays the target, pull the trigger. That's the end of it. Your sight is actually measured in mils, so by use of the various different lines, you can estimate how far away something is by simple mathematics. That's probably subject for a different lesson. So again, all you do is, oh, by the way, I now have heat loaded. So watch what happens if I fire around with heat loaded, but I haven't changed the index, because if you look at the control panel, I'm still running with Sabo. So what you will see is it will fall short. So lays the target, fire, and short. Oh dear, I forgot to change the ammo. So hop back down, go down, flip the ammunition to heat, go back to your gunner sight.
Fire.
Now the other thing you'll see is as I laze and it enters the range into the system, the range shows up at the bottom, you'll see that the sight picture will jump. Witness in a moment. Like that. And the reason it does this is because the A1 only has a single axis stabilized mirror. So in the gunner sight, there is the mirror, which is stabilized up and down as the tank is bouncing around, so it's not doing this. So it's not doing this. It's stabilized, but the control handle controls the left and right of the stabilization. So what happens is, in normal mode, and this is something a lot of people can't quite get their head around, in normal mode you control the sight, and in emergency mode you control the gun. Which means that in normal mode, all you do is you put the reticle on the target, and the computer figures out what the gun needs to do in order to hit it. So, when I laze the target, and the gun jumps up to put the correct super elevation, it also jumps left in order that when the round gets to the appropriate range, it meets up with the target. But this means that the entire turret has to turn. You know, that extra 5 degrees or whatever, which means that your sight picture also moves that same 5 degrees. To compensate for this, the reticle itself jumps to the right, like so. Now, the other problem with this, though, is as the computer is calculating the average of the last second and a half or so of tracking, if you put a false input by accident, let's say you get jostled as the tank is going across country and you accidentally go off, when you try to put it back on, you'll find that the reticle starts flying uncontrollably around. If you just lose track of your target, what you do is you double bleed. And all that is you very briefly let go of the Cadillacs and quickly grab hold of them again. Half a second, however long it takes you to open and close your hands. And that'll reset everything back to a default position and you can start your engagement over again. You also want to do it after every round is fired as well. So track the target, and the range looks good. 1450 seems to be a reasonable range. On the way.
Over.
It seems to be a reasonable range. Let's try again. Sometimes you screw it up. On the way. There we go. Alright, so I'm still running heat. Now, the next thing I'm going to demonstrate is the difference between first and last return. So, okay, we got a tank way the hell off in the distance. And if I laze right now, you'll see now that there is a bar on top of the range numbers. Oh, by the way, that little square box means the gun is ready to fire. What the bar means is that multiple returns came back from the laser, because the laser is not a pencil thin beam of light. Well, it may be at the beginning, but due to diffraction of the air and so on, it spreads out a little bit. And you could get a return back from the bush that's in front of you, or let's say right there, if I were to laze, perhaps you might get the bush return. Well, obviously the tank is not at 700 yards, or whatever the hell, 1,000 yards that the bush is at. The tank is actually at the better part of 2,000. So by selecting last return, it means that whatever the furthest distance is that the laser comes back with a bounce, that's what gets input into the fire control system. So for example, as the tank is bouncing around here, you see it goes right behind the hill. If I accidentally laze at the time that it goes behind the hill, I'll get the multiple return, but I will still get the correct distance to the target. Now, the alternative is, let's say all I see is a hull down tank and just a turret. The turret itself is smaller even than the estimated return. So the circle also works more or less as a good guideline for how wide the laser beam becomes as it goes down range. So you go back out, you select first return, and what will happen now is, let's say I mixed it with the distance as well. 1600 meters now is the distance to the tank, with again a bar. That bar is the powder bar to 2,500, whatever the distance is in the background. So let's go back to last return, don't bleed, and again I'll lace to that 2,500 it is. So that's why you want to keep an eye, on if you have first or last return. Thermal imager works in exactly the same manner as the daylight sight. You track the target for a second or so, laze, the range looks good, fire, target. And that is all there is. Oh, Sabo loaded. You heard Sabo up, so I had to switch the controller. There's a hotkey for me to do it. I didn't actually have to come out and hit that. So now let's assume that something has happened, our computer has gone down, and we're now firing in emergency mode. In emergency mode, you no longer control the sight, you now control the gun. And the end result of this is that you don't have automatic lead or super elevation calculator. Because if the computer is controlling the gun, then the computer is able to move the gun to the left or right for lead and up and down for super elevation. This is gone. The ballistic computer is still working, so it'll still give you ballistic solutions. But I lace the target, and you see the reticle jumps up or down. So let me lace to something much further away. And what the computer is telling me is that in order to hit this target, because right now there's 3,500 meters in the ballistic computer, that is where the round would impact and match with the reticle. So I lace at this 1,400 meter tank, and all of a sudden the computer is telling me, no, your gun is aiming too high, you got to lower it. So you lower it. But again, there's no lead applied. So if this tank turns around and starts moving again, and I start tracking the tank, all right, let it get up to speed. If I fire the round, because I am now controlling the gun and the gun is pointing right at the tank, by the time the round gets to the tank should have moved on. So instead, what you do is you have to manually add your own level of lead, and that's basically a swag, scientific wild ass guess. Target. And that is lead with emergency mode. Now, what happens if your laser rangefinder goes down? Well, you got to manually index the range. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that is a 2,000, commander says that's about 2 kilometers away. Go back out, go back to the gunner's control panel, hit range, enter 1200, 1200, enter, and it is now in the ballistic computer. Oh, sorry, 2000, my bad. I was stupid on me, I entered the battle site range. So 2000, go back to the site, and let's see what happens. Target. My guess was right. Now, if you're not entirely sure what the range is and you just don't have the time, heat up, and you don't have the time to enter the range, what the command, or to guess the range even, what the commander can do is hit the battle site button, which sets it to 1200 meters. And generally speaking, if the target is between 0 and 1600 meters, you'll hit the target. Now this range is well over 1200. Now this is a heat round. This has got a much longer time of flight. No, he moved. So the manual lead on the heat round is going to have to be much longer. So it was, let's try that. Oh, not even close. Well, my range was wrong as well, so it doesn't matter. No, the range was right. Alright, so let's try this. Still way off. Emergency mode gunnery is much more difficult.
Re-engage. Fire. Over.
What on earth?
Re-engage. Fire.
Oh! I am doing the old-fashioned problem. If I did this on the gunnery range, you get a ceasefire freeze. Because what I just did was I started launching saber rounds into orbit because I've been too busy talking to you and not paying attention to my TC and loader. He's been loading saber rounds into the tube and I have heat indexed. So I've been sending saber rounds into low orbit. And look at the difference. That's the heat elevation. That's the saber elevation.
Over.
Much better. So I just have to get the lead about right. Let's try that one. There we go. Alright, so that was a little embarrassing, but hey, at least I figured it out eventually. A ceasefire freeze on the gunnery range is something you don't want to hear. What it basically means is let go of the controls, don't touch a damn thing, let the master gunner come out with the quadrant to figure out where the hell the round landed. Alright, so if everything has gone to hell in a handbasket, your next thing is the auxiliary site. So let's say you shut your doghouse doors, go to the auxiliary site. This is old-fashioned steam gunnery. There is a choke site which will help you estimate range. So what you do is you match the bottom of the tank and then you kind of scroll over to see where the top is. So it looks like about 1900 meters. Let's go to the 1900 meter reticle. It's about about there. The bastard dodged. There we go. I mean, this is basically World War II steam gunnery. There are two reticles, and again, look at the difference in the
fire heat.
All right, so that's basically point blank range. You'll note that the primary position, the default crosshair is at about 1200 meters. That's because that is the battle site range.
Fire.
Now the point of battle site, as I say, is between 0 and about 1600 meters. Unfortunately, I have to go to the heat reticle now. I mean, look at the difference in the graduation between heat and saber. Between 0 and about 1600 meters, there is no point in the arc of flight of the saber round that is higher than a tank-sized target. So it might hit at the top of the tank, it might hit at the bottom of the tank, but it's going to hit somewhere. So I have heat round loaded. Let's go with 1200 yards, or let's go 1400 yards and see what happens.
Short.
Very close. Looks to be about 16. And that just wasn't enough lead. That was too much lead. I think the range is about right. Oh, come on. There we go. All right. So that is basically all the bits and bobs of the A1. Now I'll quickly hop into the A2. I'm not quite as skilled with this because my entire experience with A2s is basically the simulators in Fort Knox. But there are a couple of significant differences between the A2 and the A1. So the A2 costs a couple of $1 million more, so you better get something more for your money. Now the first thing you'll see is that the infrared section has changed, and the reason for this is they've updated it from the old 1980s thermal imager to a forward-looking infrared, a proper FLIR. And it comes with what is known as the relaxed vision monitor. So you can be sitting back, happy as Larry, not doing anything, and not having your head to the brow pad, and just as you're scanning around, oh look, there's a target, I can see the hot spot. At which point then you can put your head to the side if you want, or you can actually do the complete engagement with the magnification. Now again, you see the magnification, it goes up to by 50. But the two defaults are 3 and 13. And these are the two at the far end. Again, in times of stress, you don't want to worry about fine-tuning your muscles. Your high stress is just all the way over, all the way left. Other changes on the bottom there, we now have push button. Canister round has been added. It's basically like a 5-inch shotgun. Empath, you got your selector for air or ground targets. Empath OR is the replacement round. When I was in Iraq, for some reason, all I had was empath. Oh, if you saw on the A1, you saw also staff was the other one. That was an experimental round that was never added. Chest pad here, you need this to hold you in place, otherwise you're using the gunner's control to hold on to yourself, which is bad because you put false inputs. An M1 tanker is known as a dumbass tanker. An A2 tanker is known as a CDOT, or Jedi tanker, computerized dumbass tanker. And, well, there you go. Look, it's computerized. And the TC has its own set of weirdness as well. The daylight sights are exactly the same. Now, once you actually get into the engagement process, you're going to notice a second difference. When I laser the target, the reticle doesn't jump. So what we have now is we now have dual axis stabilization on the mirror. And the reason that this stabilized the mirror is because the mirror only weighs 1 kilo or 2. It's a lot easier for the motors to properly stabilize the mirror than it is to stabilize a 2-ton cannon. So what actually happens is the stabilization controls the mirror and the cannon keeps up, or tries to keep up. And that's what this, sometimes you'll see this little light goes out on occasion if the gun hasn't caught up. So when you pull the trigger, if the gun has not caught up to where the sight is telling it to point, then you can't fire. It's a little safety interlock, shall we say, or an accuracy interlock. On the A2, what they've done is they've not only kept the stabilization vertical, but they've also added a second pivot point horizontally. So as you're tracking the target and you laze and the gun applies the lead, the sight doesn't jump.
Target.
This is a good point and a bad point. Now, if you are not used to the A1's system of the flying reticle, this is much easier. The downside, though, is that there seems to be much less indication of when you have accidentally input a false lead, and that the computer is not actually tracking where the reticle is supposed to be. Now again, so thermal imager by 3, by 6, by 13. So that's going to be your default. No, it's not 1100, that's the bush. Is going to be your default position is by 13, because that should be plenty close enough for you to hit your target without without issue. But if for some reason, let's say you really need to see what it is that you're aiming at, or if there's only a small part of the target is visible, you can go to 25 or you can go to 50. Now the other point is that this is actually an optical zoom. So the up to by 13, it's electrical zoom. Up to by 13 is an optical zoom. Anything beyond that, the 25 and the 50, is electronic magnification. The other problem, though, with the by 50 is even the smallest inputs can send your reticle all over the place. So there's a left limit on the range fan.
Gunner, stable, tank, fire.
So that's basically the gist of it. That's your primary fire control system difference between the A1 and the A2. That wasn't tracking at all.
Re-engage. Fire. Target.
All right. So there we go. A2's fire control system. Right, so that's it. That is basically everything I can teach you about how the fire control system on an M1 works. Right, so other matters, admin notes. As you can see, the Tank is on Fire shirts have been much requested. They are now available over on the Everpress website. And they come in two colors. They come in green or black. Shout out to Jin Ching-Lim. He didn't want a shout out, but he's getting one anyway. Who was generous enough to donate his time as a fan to create the t-shirts, and have a little link. I found some of his work online if you want to see what else he does down there as an illustrator. So thank you, Mr. Lim. Otherwise, I may come back and do some of this. As you saw, there are other types of tank that are modeled, like the T-72, the M60, and so on. So we'll have a look at those as well, perhaps at a future time. But again, I am less skilled with them because I'm quite simply not trained. But who knows? Maybe I can find a Leopard 2 gunner. I can work with him, and we can do something of a similar nature with that. So we'll have a chew about that. Anyway, that is the end of this video. Again, hope you enjoyed it and found it informative. I'll see you next time.